Hello everyone, my name is Jasmine and I'm going to be sharing my experience on neck braces. Before I get started, I just want to say that this is an informational video based on my personal experience and you should always consult with a doctor before moving forward with any type of brace. Alright, so here is the first collar that I was in, and I'm not going to call it a brace, because that is a big confusion that a lot of people have with these soft collars, is they think that they're a brace. Now, all the doctors that I've been to have been very specific in saying that this is not a brace, this is not going to support you, this is not going to protect you. It's great if it's comfortable and it helps you, but it's not a brace. So this is the first brace that I got put in. This is the Aspen Vista, and I am back in it again 3 years later. The major bonus to this brace is that it's fully adjustable, which really comes in handy if your spine changes a lot from going from seated to standing. The pads are also easily replaceable and you can order all of this online. Now, as great of a brace as this is for supporting your cervical spine, it's pretty terrible if you have cranial instability, because when you have cranial instability you tend to get occipital headaches, which means that the brace presses right into the occiput and can actually worsen your occipital headaches. That was one of my major complaints of this brace. Well, I just found out that Aspen actually makes a new brace now that's called the multi-post. And I found out about this brace from a friend who also had a cranial cervical fusion this year, and from what I hear, it really greatly reduces the problems I was just complaining about, so you might want to check this one out. I wore it for, I think, about 2 months before I started developing pretty severe pain in my upper thoracic spine, right here. So, that is the other major issue with this brace. If you have multiple spinal instabilities, it doesn't do the greatest job of transmitting the force to a natural position. It tends to put all the weight of your head right up into the top of your thoracic spine. The other thing that's a little bit problematic with this brace is that it doesn't support your skull that well. Especially from a side-to-side perspective. If you have really bad cranial instability, you can definitely get a lot of torquing motion going on with your skull. So that's definitely an issue as well. So because of the pain in my thoracic spine, the next brace I tried is called an Aspen Vista with a thoracic extension. I don't have that one any longer, but it's basically the same thing as this. It just goes down a little bit further. And I think it's a personal preference. Again, to combat the pain in my thoracic spine, tried another brace also by Aspen, and this one is called Summit 456. This is really good if you have kyphosis or excessive hyperangulation in your spine. You can wear this with the Aspen collar. Theoretically that should have worked for my problem, but it just wasn't customizable enough, and I was going to have to get a fusion surgery or find a different brace. And technically it is called a custom cervical thoracic orthosis, but if you're looking for a company that knows how to make them well, definitely look for a company that does cranial molding helmets. The way that they make this brace is they wrap you up like a mummy while you're standing, and then they cut you out of the plaster so that the curvature of your spine is pretty much exactly as you are. The bonus to this brace is that obviously it has a lot more support for your skull. It prevents a lot of that side-to-side motion that can particularly be a problem in your sleep if you have cranial instability, because you don't know what's going on in your sleep, especially if you're a side sleeper. And it has the added bonus of the head strap, which is really important to use during transportation. Let me tell you, I should have been using it more often. You do have to be careful with these head straps, because I was originally told that this piece was optional. It probably is optional if you're wearing it correctly, but you need to make sure that you're wearing it correctly, and you also need to be careful that you don't get these things caught on anything. Because that happened to me on several occasions, which really resulted in a lot of skull sloshing movements and a lot of my neurological, I don't want to talk about that on camera. As awesome as it is that this will fit you correctly, that also comes with the fact that it'll be less adjustable. So like this brace always fit me really good when I was standing, but it never fit me when I was sitting because it doesn't have the option to move the chin strap up and down at all. And the other issue is that if you're somebody that has a lot of surgeries, which that's the other problem that happened to me, is right after I got this brace and it fit great, I ended up needing a tethered cord release and an L1, L2 fusion, which totally changed the shape of my spine. And then after the surgery, it really only fit me when I was hunched over or laying down. So that's another problem with these braces. So since I had to have that back surgery that totally changed the shape of my spine, and it hadn't been a long enough period of time for my insurance to want to pay for another one of those, so we had to get a little creative here with trying different braces. So this is the next one I tried. So the bonus to this brace is that, again, like the aspen collar, you can adjust it up and down. It's also really cool because you can adjust it on the sides too, not just up and down. But I will say this one is a little bit more fragile in some ways with the chin strap. And it definitely fits your jawline totally differently, which for me, it never fit the shape of my face. And I'm not sure if that's because I never got the correct size or if it just didn't quite come small enough for me. And we did do some custom modifications to this brace to better support my skull, because just like the aspen collar, most of these braces are not designed for cranial instability, they're designed for cervical issues. So we added further straps onto the side here to prevent the side-to-side motion of my head. And we added a metal bar on the back here so that even though the plastic is already pretty rigid, this made sure it was super rigid. And we also added in additional padding deep in here to support the back of my head as the occiput. And basically the concept for this brace was for me to use during my sleep. And then I was still going to use the other blue brace for exercise or sitting, since that was when it fit me best after surgery. And if I was going to really be active, I knew that this was going to hurt my thoracic spine, so had to get the super big brace here, which has the same top component attached to a full spinal, I guess this would be called a custom cervical, thoracic, lumbar orthosis. Although these two pieces themselves are not customized to me. They were not molded to me. They're both pieces that were then put together to fit me. This one had some major bonuses to it, for sure, because I was definitely in the least back pain while I was wearing this, because it puts the force of your head and your entire spine onto your hip bones. This was a really great option for me when I was standing or walking, which I was walking a lot during this time, and the only problem is that it really only fit me while I was standing. And if you haven't noticed a little trend here, the basic problem with all these braces is that they tend to fit in one position and not the other, especially when you have Ehlers-Danlos and all your joints move around more excessively than other people's. So for me to use this brace, I would have to bring it in the car and then put it on wherever I was going. And since I can't drive, that was not all that useful for me. Another major issue with this brace, at least for cranial instability, is that it is not designed in a way that's really, honestly, I don't think safe for cranial instability, because it's such a big piece of hardware, and then if it gets bumped up in any way, it's going to push all of that force onto your skull. That can be a really big issue, even transitioning from standing to sitting. If it just gets jolted up a little bit, that's going to give you a whiplash effect. Be careful about that. This one also has the optional head strap that does keep your forehead in place. This one. Oh, one more thing I have to say, I forgot. This is not very good if you are highly active, because I don't know how many times I broke this brace. I swear I popped off the buckles in my sleep one time, which I don't recommend sleeping in this at all, but yeah, if you're highly active, you will break this brace many, many times. Become very good friends with the orthotics people. So we have Return of the Blue Brace. Now this one looks similar to the one that I showed earlier, but it is a remake of the same model with a different version of Jasmine because I was straighter after my first back surgery. By the time I was in this brace, it was really becoming clear that my cranial instability was semi-unmanageable in a bracing situation, because I was still just having so many issues with car rides and bumps and all that type of stuff. I was standing up really straight, and they didn't have to add quite as much of a helmet onto the top of it, because I could still use the head strap and attach it over here without having to have like such big flaps over my head. So it's kind of hard to determine. You want to have the smallest brace possible so you can have somewhat of a hairstyle and stuff like that. Also just exercise, it gets really kind of claustrophobic in here. But yeah, this shape of the brace turned out to be really well made for cranial instability, I think. It was just enough to protect the skull, but not enough to be annoying like the other one. And this one never got caught on things like the other one did. Okay, so there's also some other customizations that I added into this one later on. Again, I added more padding in here to support the back of my head, the occiput, so that it wasn't sinking in. Because at this point in time, I'd really lost the ability to keep my skull up high enough to prevent it from sinking down onto my spine, so I definitely really needed extra padding here. And then I also added extra padding into the shoulders so that the brace was resting on top of my body. It was kind of more reliant on this strap, but when you have exactly the right amount of padding here, then it will be more reliant on your shoulders. Now, that is another major negative to this form of bracing. So although it transfers the weight of your skull better down into your spine, it can cause major issues if you have thoracic outlet syndrome, which I have, or like nerve compression issues. Also, if you have a central line or a port, you need to be really careful. I almost ruined my port because it was pressing right where my line is. Warning about that. Let's see. You need to make sure that somebody is monitoring you to make sure that you are wearing it correctly. Because what happened to me is they ended up leaving a lot of this jaw portion out here because my jaw didn't come out this far. It probably stopped right about here. Unfortunately, this led me to really figure out a way to completely wear the brace incorrectly, and for quite some time I kept moving my skull forwards because it allowed me to, which is actually super dangerous. Under normal circumstances, I couldn't have even put my skull into such a bad position. But having the support of the brace allowed me to put my skull in a worse position than I could have figured out how to do on my own. This brace allowed me to put my chin almost like nearly 2 inches out here, and I could actually rest onto the brace. I would say it's really important to have somebody continuously monitoring the way that you're wearing your brace, especially if you have something that can be potentially life-threatening. Like, you have to know where you started and where you went. I think if you saw me in the brace, you wouldn't have known that I was wearing it incorrectly, but if you saw where my head was when I was supposed to be wearing it, you would have noticed the difference. Photographs to your doctor theoretically would be good, but unfortunately I think most people who have these types of conditions are working with physicians who are just completely overloaded with patients, and they just simply don't have time. I would say maybe the biggest thing I could recommend is I think if I would have taken monthly pictures of how I was wearing the brace and then also how I felt out of the brace. Because it's not just the brace's fault, my condition was also worsening and I was seriously losing the ability to have any type of postural control. Unfortunately, it turned into a cyclical issue where I was losing muscular control and control over my posture because of the cranial instability, and then that was making the cranial instability worse, so it was a cycle. But yeah, continuous monitoring from somebody that will pay attention is probably more important than who the person is and what their credentials are. Just somebody that cares about you that will pay attention.
So when I was making this video, I apparently forgot to explain why I was using a neck brace in the first place, which was for originally atlantoaxial instability. Shortly after, I found out my cranial instability was worse and that I had a bunch of other issues going on with my cervical spine and upper thoracic spine, and 3.5 years ago, if I was going to get a fusion, it was going to have to be the majority of my neck or more. So I opted to do physical therapy, wear the brace. I actually have to say that indoor rock climbing, I think is what really saved my spine. Over the course of these 3.5 years, I was able to strengthen my back enough so that the only instability that was showing up on the MRIs was the cranial cervical instability, so I ended up getting a cranial cervical fusion November of 2017. Now,
you never think that you'd be so excited about something like
No,
this.
it's not listed because I talked to her.
My head/skull will be repositioned on my spine and fused to the C1 and C2 vertebrae, so that I will no longer be causing microtrauma
I did talk to her before.
to my brainstem and upper spinal cord.
Because I went to the
What?
Blood flow.
Oh.
Yeah.
And I will no longer be cutting off my vertebral arteries. That is also important.
I do have to say that I probably should have had this surgery earlier. There are 2 other reasons why I think I ended up waiting too long. One was I was getting a lot of backlash from the general medical community about the idea of having a cranial fusion, and I think I got a little freaked out by it. The other reason is that I didn't understand that so many of my problems were not musculoskeletal and that they were actually neuromuscular. So I wasn't even complaining about a lot of my neuromuscular symptoms to my neurosurgeon because I just thought they were from EDS, and that was just how EDS is. And I will be making another video trying to explain, now that I know the difference between which of my problems are from the joint laxity and which of the problems are from injuries to my brainstem or upper spinal cord, because I do think that's something that people need to be aware of.